surveillance, covert action, overt economic embargo, and contemporary democracy promotion programs have dominated and defined more than a half-century of U.S. Cuban relations. What Henry Kissinger characterized as the perpetual antagonism between Washington and Havana remains among the most entrenched and enduring conflicts in the history of U.S. foreign policy. The Untold Story. There is, however, another side to the history of U.S.-Cuban relations, far less known but more relevant today: the bilateral efforts at dialogue, rapprochement, and reconciliation. Every president since Eisenhower has engaged in some form of dialogue with Castro and his representatives. Some talks have been tightly circumscribed, dealing only with specific narrow issues of mutual interest, such as immigration, air piracy, and drug interdiction. Others have been wide-ranging, engaging the full panoply of issues at stake between the two sides. Some episodes of dialogue produced tangible agreements, formal and informal. Others sputtered to a halt with no discernible result. But every U.S. president, Democrat and Republican alike, has seen some advantage in talking to Cuba. Indeed, both Democratic and Republican administrations have engaged in little-known efforts to arrive at a modus vivendi with the Cuban Revolution. After authorizing a paramilitary invasion to overthrow Castro by force and implementing a full trade embargo to cripple the Cuban economy, John F. Kennedy ordered his aides to start thinking along more flexible lines in negotiating a state of peaceful coexistence with Castro. During Gerald Ford's presidency, Henry Kissinger directed his aides to deal straight with Castro and negotiate improved relations like a big guy, not like a shyster. Jimmy Carter actually signed a presidential decision directive to achieve normalization of our relations with Cuba through direct and confidential talks. Given the domestic political sensitivity surrounding any hint of better relations with Havana, these talks, and many other contacts with Cuba, have often been conducted through secret back-channel diplomacy. To maintain plausible deniability, U.S. presidents have turned to third countries, among them Mexico, Spain, Britain, and Brazil, as hosts and facilitators. To limit the political risk of direct contact, Washington and Havana have developed creative clandestine methods of communication, deploying famous literary figures, journalists, politicians, businessmen, and even a former President of the United States as interlocutors. When face-to-face talks have been necessary, Cuban and U.S. officials have met furtively in foreign cities such as Paris, Cuernavaca, and Toronto, or in private homes, crowded cafeterias, prominent hotels, and even on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. On several occasions, White House and State Department officials have secretly traveled to Havana to negotiate face-to-face with Fidel Castro. Not surprisingly, this rich history of U.S. back-channel diplomacy with Cuba has been shrouded in secrecy, buried in thousands of classified files that record the internal debates, meetings, agendas, negotiations, arguments, and agreements that have transpired over more than half a century. In the absence of an accessible historical record, scholarship and analysis on U.S.-Cuban relations has largely focused on the more prominent and visible history of antagonism, skewing the historical debate over whether better ties were possible or even desirable. The dearth of evidence on the many efforts to find common ground has empowered the anti-dialogueros, as one U.S. official called them, to cast serious diplomacy with Cuba as an oxymoron at best, a heresy at worst. Long after the end of the Cold War, talking with Cuba remained a delicate and controversial political proposition, even as the benefits have become increasingly obvious to both countries. Back Channel to Cuba. This book presents a comprehensive chronicle of the history of dialogue between the United States and Cuba since 1959. The pages that follow are an attempt to assess this historical record of negotiations, both secret and open, at a time when that record is especially pertinent to the political discourse over U.S. relations with Cuba. Both Barack Obama and Raul Castro publicly declared their desire to move beyond the past half-century's legacy of hostility. Both Washington and Havana appeared to realize that international, national, and mutual interests would be advanced by a successful negotiation of normal bilateral ties. But as the history of dialogue shows, having the intention to improve relations and actually